Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. I am joined by, of course, my colleague in government, Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, who represents this area here in Chinatown, as well as, and we're honored to have the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, Chairman Hersman. Let me give you the drill for today. The chairman is going to outline the details of the finding of the report. Then I will speak and Congresswoman Velázquez will speak not only about what the report means, but what we intend to do about it to make travel safer. So with that, I'm going to introduce somebody who's done a great job. The NTSB is one of those few agencies that politics hasn't infected in Washington. They are on the merits. They are focused on safety. And as the chairman said to me before, you can't tell when they issue statements whether it's a Democrat or Republican member of the board making those statements, because it's the way it used to be, and maybe we can get some of that back elsewhere. Chairman Hersman.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Schumer. It's so good to be here in New York City, one of the biggest transportation hubs in the country and the largest city in the country. Earlier this year, in rapid succession, the NTSB investigated 3 fatal bus accidents that killed 21 people and injured dozens more. All of these operations were so-called curbside carriers. The most serious accident happened here in New York City on March 12th in the Bronx. Before dawn, a bus traveling from the Mohegan Sun casinos to Chinatown left the I-95 travel lanes, crossed the road's shoulder, struck a barrier, traveled more than 500 feet, rolled over, and collided with a signpost. And that sign pole drove through the bus's window and through the center of the bus. That Bronx crash killed 15 people and injured 18 more. More fatal curbside carriers had accidents in the months that followed. In March, there was a fatal accident in New Jersey, and in June, there was another fatal accident in Virginia. These crashes waved a red flag about these curbside carriers. Immediately after the Bronx accident, Senator Schumer and Representative Velázquez sent a letter to the NTSB asking us to take a look at these low-cost operators. And I'd like to thank them both here for their leadership on this issue and their keen understanding of transportation safety issues. Thank you all for raising the profile of Motorcoach safety. Before I talk about our findings, I'd like to first give you a definition. Neither low cost nor curbside operations are regulatory terms. These operators, however, are an evolving business model. They consist of scheduled trips between locations other than traditional bus terminals. And most of these operators pick up passengers at one or more curbside locations. Our study is the first of its kind. It's an in-depth safety examination of this evolving business model. We analyzed the Federal Motor Carrier Administration's data. We conducted field work. We had focus groups with investigators and bus drivers. And we observed compliance reviews and inspections of vehicles and drivers. Yet, since this is not a regulatory category, the available information was very limited and in many cases incomplete when it came to these curbside operators. So here's what we did find. Of the nearly 4,200 motor coach operators throughout the country, at least 71 of them provide curbside service. Some have been operating for years, and many have just begun operations recently. What we found that in general, bus travel is very safe. We also found that across the country, curbside operators with 10 or fewer buses and that have been operating for less than 10 years tend to have a poor safety record than their counterparts who have been operating longer with larger fleets. They also, curbside operators, when compared to other bus companies, had higher fatal accident rates, and they had higher driver out of service rates. Digging deeper, the fatal accident rate of curbside operators is 7 times higher than that for conventional bus operations. And perhaps the biggest conclusion was that business and safety practices within the growing curbside bus operator industry create challenges when it comes to enforcement and also for consumers when you're trying to separate the safe carriers from the unsafe carriers. For one, the FMCSA and state inspectors are overburdened. There are only 878 FMCSA and state personnel that conduct compliance reviews for more than 765,000 operators. That's almost one inspector for 1,000 companies. 2, there is very little transparency, and there's not enough truth when it comes to sales. Often consumers do not know what they are buying. More than conventional carriers, curbside operators rely on bus brokers for tickets. They can purchase a ticket online and not even know the name of the company that's providing the service. All they know is what corner to go to meet the bus. And while FMCSA has sought this authority, they do not have any authority over bus brokers. 3, by law, buses are exempted from en route inspections. Conventional operators can be inspected at their terminal locations, but for curbside operators that do not have terminals, this prohibition on en route inspections does create problems for the enforcement agency, and it reduces the opportunity to uncover safety violations. The time was ripe for this review, and with the recent accidents and the explosive growth in this industry, it was an important review. It's time to carefully consider the safety risks and also the shortcomings in the regulatory oversight. All this reinforces why the NTSB has been advocating bus safety on our most wanted list of transportation safety improvements. And our study reinforces the absolute importance of the Senate's pending bus safety bill, the Motorcoach Enhanced Safety Act of 2011, which contains many of the NTSB's recommendations. I'd like to turn the microphones over to one of our leading safety advocates, Senator Schumer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Hersman has lived up to the little billing that we gave her because she does a great job on the merits, no nonsense, and it's a great report. I also want to thank my friend and colleague, Congresswoman Velasquez. We have worked together on this issue and will continue to work together on this issue, and she's been a leading advocate in the House for safety. Now, today marks an important turning point in our effort to ensure that the curbside bus industry is safe for the thousands of passengers who use the buses. As we have all too tragically seen over the last year, the curbside bus industry has grown at an exceptionally rapid rate, but the safety regime has failed to keep pace. And while many curbside bus carriers work to operate at the highest standard, for too long, some bad apples in the industry have played fast and loose with passenger safety, and today we're here to say enough is enough. Now, the bottom line is, if there is one thing that this report shows, it's that the lack of effective oversight for the curbside bus carriers has created an environment where passenger safety often comes second to shortcuts and to profits. With this report as a blueprint, we plan to construct a comprehensive safety regime that keeps pace with the growth of the industry, gives consumers the information they need to make safe decisions, and gives federal authorities the tools they need to help put the bad apples of this industry out of business. We all remember the horrific crashes, and we knew, any of us who traveled the highways in and out of New York knew there was something wrong when we saw certain buses speeding and behaving recklessly. And it made you scratch your head and think, what is going on? And then, of course, there was the tragic accidents that have occurred in the Bronx, in Virginia, and in other places. That's why we called on the NTSB to do a broad investigation as to what should happen. And the NTSB answered the call. The NTSB confirmed what too many of us had feared. Companies that pick up passengers on the curb have much higher accident rates than those that pick them up in terminals. The NTSB found accident rates vary, and many companies do a great job, but curbside bus carriers with less than 10 buses in their fleet have a 7 times more likelihood of having accidents and fatalities than your average motor coach carrier. That is an amazing statistic. A company with 10 or fewer buses that's only been in existence a short time, you have a 7 times greater chance of fatalities. That is unacceptable, and it will stop. The fines are too low. For many of these operators, safety violations and fines are built in as their business model. It's a slap on the wrist, and they say, look, we'll pay the fine and keep operating the way we do. That is not good. The fines are too low to act as a deterrent. So here is what needs to be done. First, transparency. Carriers have been cited for safety violations, can easily re-register or reincarnate as a new company with a new name at lightning speed. Consumers cannot find information as to which buses are safe and which are not. Obviously, if the price is pretty much the same, and consumers knew that this company has a good record and very few accidents, and the company across the street has a whole lot of accidents, they'd ride this one, and there'd be pressure on that company to get better. We want good old-fashioned American competition based on consumer knowledge to help reform the industry. Buying a curbside ticket is not all that different than playing Let's Make a Deal. Consumers have no idea what they're getting, what's behind the curtain when they purchase their ticket. And the reason is twofold. First, it's very hard to figure out. You have to visit the website of an agency called the FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. How many people have heard of that agency, let alone go to its website to find out the record? The process is cumbersome, and the ratings are not easy to understand. So one of the things we're going to do is push the Department of Transportation. This is not the NTSB's job. They just give the report. It's other agencies and legislation that take the report and turn it into action. But here's what we want to do, very simply. We want to give people easy grades and make those grades available. So we want the regulatory authorities to grade buses from A to D in terms of safety. We then want those grades to be displayed in the bus windows. We want them to be displayed online. And we want the brokers who often sell the tickets to have to list what the safety grade is. Can you imagine if a bus knew that it was going to have an A, it would get more business than if a D. And if a bus company knew it was getting a D and knew that consumers wouldn't ride it because there is a lot of competition, they'd make themselves a whole lot safer. They would make sure that their bus drivers were up to snuff. They would make sure that their bus drivers were not overworked. They would make sure that their bus drivers were told, don't speed, even if you have to be a little late. Transparency can be a real cure here. As Justice Brandeis once said, sunlight is the greatest prophylactic, and we intend to bring some sunlight to the agency. And second, we want to make sure that these brokers that the chair mentioned have to tell their customers, whoever buys a ticket, what the safety rating is, both online, in writing, and verbally. That, we think, will bring some real results on its own without having to hire any more inspectors, because we know these are tough, difficult budget times. But the report also showed that the FMCSA, the agency that's charged with regulating the industry, just doesn't have the manpower to do so. They have one inspector for every 1,000 motor coaches. You can't govern that way. And secondly, when they're not allowed to make inspections on the road, it gives the curbside carriers who don't have terminals and may not even have offices a leg up on all the others if they want to cut corners. And we want to change both of those things. We want them to have the authority to inspect on the road, and we want them to have more inspectors. We're also asking that with the limited inspectors they have, they go all out between now and Christmas, because this is the holiday season. And even with the limited inspectors they have, they ought to make sure that the many, many people who take the buses to go visit loved ones, come home from college during the Thanksgiving and Christmas seasons, get the best possible safety available. Now, as for the terminals, as for the roadside inspections, they're essential. And sometimes the industry doesn't like them, but they're essential. It's sort of like saying, when you can't inspect on roadside, that if you park your car in your driveway and you have an illegal license plate, they can't give you a ticket. It makes no sense. If you park your car in the street, they can give you a ticket. You park your car in your driveway, they can't. Same thing here. So, we need to make the changes that are necessary. And lastly, the report shows that there is driver fatigue, long thought to be a contributing factor we have seen in this industry, and it shows that it's a significant problem. We need to step up enforcement. Sorry. That's a different issue. Noisy trucks. That's not yours. We need to do two things. One, we need background checks for the drivers. If a driver has a record of safety violations, they shouldn't be allowed to drive for that company or another company. That is extremely important. And second, we need to make sure that the drivers get rest so they're not driving when they're tired and far more prone to accident. And we're going to ask in the legislation that all that be done. So overall, this report is a great guide for us to put in place more comprehensive safety regulations. 10 years ago, nobody even knew about the discount curbside bus industry. It probably hardly existed. Now it's grown like topsy. The regulatory regime hasn't kept up. It will be our job and our mission to impose safety rules in place so that curbside discount buses are as safe as the regular commercial buses that have been safe for a very long period of time. With that, let me turn it over to my friend and colleague, another stalwart person on this issue, and I have a nickname for a lot of my friends. Her nickname is La Luchadora, the fighter.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. Thank you so much on behalf of my constituents here in Chinatown. Welcome everyone to my district here in Chinatown. Chairwoman or Chairman Hersman and your staff, thank you so much for giving us this report. It will serve as a roadmap for Senator Schumer and myself to work together to address some of the shortcomings in oversight, manpower, transparency, and most importantly, information to consumers. If people know where to go to find out about safety measures and safety issues regarding all these curbside companies, they will be empowered to make the right decision, whether or not it's a matter of cutting corner, given the fact two things are important for people to understand. The state of the economy. Many people are struggling in terms of having enough resources to travel, and two, with the holidays approaching, is so important because we owe this to the families of those who were killed in those tragic accidents. Let me just say that the March Bronx accident was a heartbreaking tragedy that took the lives of 15 members of my community. We owe it to the victims and their families to learn from this crash and prevent future losses. The NTSB report shows that bus travel is generally a safe mode of transportation, but saying an industry is generally safe is not consolation to the families of those who lost their lives. We must strive to make this industry as safe as possible. Not only were 15 lives tragically lost in March, but there have been other accidents in recent times. Many of those who use this mode of transportation are the least affluent members of our communities, immigrants, students, and low-income individuals. We have an obligation to keep them safe and protect them from harm. With the Thanksgiving holiday fast approaching, curbside buses will only become more popular, and travelers of all ages look for ways to save money. Here in Chinatown, curbside buses are responsible for more than 2,000 arrivals and departures weekly. The message today is clear. Safety should not take a backseat to low cost and convenience. So this is what we want to do. To restore confidence in bus travel, we're going to need more safety inspection of curbside buses and stiffer penalties for violations. A new federal standard for driver qualifications will also prevent drivers from forum shopping for the state with the lowest requirements for a commercial driver's license. This NTSB study is an important step in recognizing the issues presented by the overnight success and growth of curbside busing. Improving this industry will make us safer, not only as passengers, but as travelers and commuters sharing the road. And I want to again thank Chairman Hirschman, her staff, and Senator Schumer. It's a great day for people here in Chinatown, for the families who lost their victims who die in these accidents. And it is important for the entire community and the safety of our nation to make sure that we take the next steps so that we could have the best, not mode and low-cost mode of transportation, but the safety one that the people in this country deserve. Thank you.
We're ready for questions for any of us on this subject first.
Senator, it's a little bit difficult to get your arms around this industry because of just the way it's come together, right? How do you intend to do that?
Well, you're right. One of the things that we will do is require that every company that actually picks up people on the curb has a license to do it, and that will allow enforcement, because once they have a license, we can find out who they are, and they could have to put up a bond. That's one possibility. If they keep violating the law, you can even confiscate their buses. It's an elusive industry because anybody can sort of sell tickets, get people on a bus and let them go. But we're going to change that. We have shown that we can regulate bus safety. Because of the NTSB's good work over the years, bus travel on the regular commercial carriers is very, very safe. I think it was mentioned that the number of fatalities is minimal. You're much safer riding one of the regular buses than riding a car. Well, we can make that happen for curbside as well. It's just that it's a new industry, it's cropped up like Topsy, and we're going to make sure that the same kind of regime that has made regular commercial bus traffic safe applies to these buses. Yes.
There have been some incidents recently where these buses will stop for 5 hours at a time on the middle of a highway because the driver has finished up his allotted number of hours. They need to wait for another driver to come in. How do you prevent things like that happening when you turn over regulations?
Well, again, there is a contract that a bus makes with the passenger. And if they're violating that contract, maybe we should have to tell them that if that's going to happen, that people should get their money back. It's part of the contract. It's something we should look at. It's new. I didn't know about that. I don't know if you did, Chair, but we will look at that. It's a good point.
And also, Senator, we should have a better reporting system in place so that passengers could call anonymously. And also, the Federal Motorcoach Safety Administration should have a better statistic reporting so that we could gather from the data that they could provide whether or not companies are using these type of tactics.
That's not a safety issue, but it's something we should look at.
Perhaps just from a safety issue, the question was about buses that might pull over on the roadside because a driver has achieved or exceeded their hours of service limitations. I think the key point here is that that is a management issue and that's a scheduling issue. And if there are costs that are being cut because they don't have adequate drivers and they don't have good scheduling, that is a concern. But it is far better for the consumer, for the driver to pull over when they are fatigued and not exceed their hours of service. We have seen too many accidents that involve fatigued drivers who are illegally operating beyond their hours of service requirements, and that issue is on our most wanted list of transportation improvements. And so I would much rather see a driver pull over if they have exceeded their hours of service requirements than to violate those and put all of the passengers on board in jeopardy. And so it would be very important for there to be a component of the legislation to provide for that kind of reporting and also for protection for the drivers.
Reed.
Senator, Republicans in the House have talked a lot about stripping away regulatory frameworks. How do you convince them something like this that's largely urban issue?
Two points. The first is, I think when it comes to safety, there's a broad consensus. And, you know, when, for instance, we were on the FAA bill and it came to inspectors of airplanes, they backed off and said, no, we don't mean to cut inspectors of airplanes and make airlines safe. This is a safety issue on the ground. But second, we are mindful of the fact that budgets are tight. And that's why having some self-enforcement, we are mindful that budgets are tight, and that's why having self-enforcement with these grades makes a whole lot of sense. That's one of the reasons we think it could work. It could work even better. I often find self-enforcement when consumers have available information is the best way to get industries to comply.
Department of Transportation that would do the grades?
Yes. They wouldn't. NTSB, I don't think that's their jurisdiction. Yes. You go to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration website, but they don't have it simple like in a letter grade, so it's very hard. There's almost no way to do it.
But how is the inspection actually done? Where do you stop?
Well, go ahead.
The question was how are curbside carriers inspected? Right now, there's a prohibition on en route inspections for all motor coach operations. Operators can be inspected at origin or destination, and so there is the ability. So, for example, when they're in a casino, dropping passengers at a casino as their destination, or if that's the start of their trip as their origin, the inspectors in that state could perform an inspection of those operators. There is the authority for inspectors and roadside officials to pull a motor coach operation over if they believe there is an imminent hazard. And so they can pull them over on the roadside, but they have to show that it's an imminent hazard. Further, we have inspectors that can come and take a look at the drivers, but as you can see, this is an extremely busy street and an extremely busy corridor. It's very difficult to do a vehicle inspection on the roadside here.